Hi creators, it's Claire from Springworth and it's time for a new project and a scrappy project. YouTube seems to be sending me lots of scrappy projects and I have been inspired. So I'm going to be making these little blocks. And what I actually really love about this is the kind of improv of it, that they kind of come around. And I was reading from, I think it's 15 Minutes of Play, long time ago, when she was writing about crumb quilting. Start with an odd sided shape. She suggests 5 in the middle and then build it a little bit like a log cabin. And you end up with all sorts of different angles. So I have lots of scraps from this project. And if you haven't seen this hexagon jacket, go back in the channel and find them. And they started out a little bit like this. You know, you can see there where I cut the shoulders of the inside. So I've gone through and I've started cutting these up. So there's a few different piles and I have a huge mess on the desk. So let me show you the piles. So firstly, I have some leftover hexagons and some full hexagons from when I trimmed the size that I needed. I'm actually going to keep those in a separate pile. I don't really consider those scraps or crumbs. They're just future supplies for a project. I also have some that are actually already strip pieced together. Again, I'm going to keep those because I actually have plenty of scraps. I do have some of the kind of long strips as well, and I'll keep those. Again, I'll find something to do with those. The project I want to make is probably this high. Can't quite see that. I'm going to put a little strip down the side of the windows. We have blackout blinds, but they don't quite go to the edge. That's fine. That's the way the blinds were installed and kind of designed. So I'm going to put a little strip, like a tiny thin curtain almost of these. I've got blackout for the back and it's just going to sit on either side of the window. So that's kind of the size. What I have done so far, because I'm addicted, I've gone through and I have pulled apart all the scraps. There's some pieces that I'm just not going to be able to use, like they really are tiny, so those will go for stuffing. Then I've got all of these and I've gone through and ironed some of them because it does make it easier to work with. There were also some kind of half hexagons that were cut where I was kind of at the fabric end that, you know, it's got the selvage on, but they just wouldn't make a full hexagon. So I've added those in as well as the offcuts. And I've pretty much got this nice, it's quite a lot already. So I'm not necessarily going to be able to use all of this. The other thing I do have some strips of solids because it kind of is useful. This was the bias. It's useful to have some long strips as the blocks get a little bit bigger. And I also have just a very small amount of this kind of edging. And I figured there was no point pulling this apart. I can actually run a seam along one of the edges. So I've made this finished block and the size I'm going for is 4x4. And then I have a couple of blocks in progress, not quite finished. But this, you can see I used some of that pre-strip pieced already. And it actually looks really nice. I think what I'm finding is you do want to try and vary the angles. If I'd kept this the same width all the way along, it wouldn't quite look as good. The point is to have lots of random angles. And I've not necessarily started with pieces this small because that would be quite difficult. I've trimmed down to those sizes. And obviously you keep all your trimmings as well because they can become pieces in your next block. So there's everything on my table. I've not quite measured up the project because I just was carried along with the fun of this last night when I got started. This is probably going to be the centre of my next piece. I'm going to see how the 5 goes. That is quite big if I'm trying to come in to this size, so I might actually kind of cut that in half and see where we end up. Warning, somehow I managed to make this quite a messy project. You may be able to do this differently, but I have so many different parts, and there are tiny pieces of thread from cutting the fabric apart, cutting the seams apart everywhere. So if you like a tidy room, tidy sewing space, take this one with a grain of salt. If you're willing to get stuck in and pretty much addicted to making blocks, that's where I got to last night, then definitely jump in. It's a really quick and easy project. Pull a couple of scraps, particularly at this size. It doesn't actually take very much to get to a finished block. Initially, a block may seem like you need to add more, like there's a big gap here, but if you have your template, you can kind of play around. So if I was to place the block here, then yes, I would need to fill this, but I can actually start to kind of just twist and maneuver. Obviously I do have that point here, and I can only come down as far as the fabric, but I'm not too worried about it because that would get eaten up in the seam allowance. So I'll probably pretty much go here. I don't really have that much of an alternative unless I fill that corner. So as you piece, do kind of think about what orientation you're going to go with, and then you build from there. That's how I got to just add in this bit. You know, I could have filled here. That would have been pretty easy. But I wasn't keen on having that line running straight, so I really wanted to have kind of that twist, and this piece would end up pretty small if I'd cut it a different way. So I'll trim these two up, because then all of these little scraps will go in to the pile of potential pieces. A twisting rotary mat will make this job a little bit easier, but otherwise just turn and realign your template or roller. This one's a little bit off. So these pieces I think are big enough, considering you may just need that little extra. A piece like that is too small, really. By the time you've put a seam allowance on that, you're not going to get anything from it. These ones, that one's okay. These ones are probably going to just toss into the filling bag. And I will just take a second and pull out any thread. I might just go and check how many blocks I need to make before I get carried away and make these all day. So I'll come back to you when I have more, maybe not all of them. have 12 now of the mini-ish 4-inch scraps made, and you really can tell a difference if you use kind of the log cabin technique where you go side, 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 side as you go around, and the random improv technique where you just add bits of fabric that seem to be the same length. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples of that. So this one, improv, whereas this one, you can see I really did go and follow that large teal in the center. So you can see the difference in those two, maybe. Then I also had this improv, and you can really see that stripe, but I actually really like that. I did almost follow this, but then as I grew that way instead of around the shape, versus this more log cabin, as you can see, I really did follow that shape. And the thing, if you are going to do a log cabin with ideally a 5-sided shape, I do agree with the 15 minutes of play blog that I found works best. I really do think it's easiest to start on the shortest edge, because there's a couple of times where I did have a 5-sided shape. This is actually the example. And because I didn't start on the shortest edge, I actually lost it in some of the seam allowance. So there was actually a 5th corner in here. But when I added one of the pieces, I lost that shortest edge. I've measured the window and it's 4 foot, so it's 48 inches that I need to cover. But I am thinking I'm going to put some space between these. They are really very busy. And if I kind of butt them up against each other, it's going to be a very, very, very busy strip. So I'm just thinking I'm going to put some sash in between them, which obviously impacts how many I have to make, and I would like to have matching on either side. So right now, I'm just going to keep on making more until I've had enough or I've run out of scrap fabric, which probably isn't going to happen because I just found a bunch more. So I will come back to you when I've decided on the sashing collar. I was thinking blue, but also maybe bringing in something else from the scraps drawer. And then I will show you how I'm gonna kind of bring this together into a piece.